Call the special meeting of the Water Commissioners to order. Introductions. I'm David Trubeck, Chairman of the Board of Water Commissioners.
Mark Robinson, Water Commissioner.
Scott Grizzly, same.
Hans Kaiser, I'm the supervisor of the Water Supply Division, Town of Barnstable DPW.
Bruce Young, Master of Water.
John is Master of Water also.
Oh, great. Mark, why don't you kick off the proceedings?
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate Bruce and John driving a long way to a little village to it. I'm glad to have you here. This is a subject that's been on our collective minds for quite a few years. We've done more testing of sodium levels in our Intuit water supply, and continue to be concerned that they're hovering right around the maximum recommended limit of 20 milligrams per liter. And but it's consistent, I would say, consistently high. We consider it high. I guess it's a relative term. And this spring, summer, we reached out to our fellow water departments and asked them if they were likewise concerned. Most of them responded saying yes, they were. I imagine if you're here today, Hans, you probably share that concern about sodium levels and your
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so before we approach the town, what we should say is that we have these districts that are separate from the town government. I know that's unusual, perhaps statewide, but fairly common on the Cape. I know Dennis and Bourne and Sandwich certainly have districts that supply water that are different than the town government departments. But because the town of Barnstable governs the use of salt on its town roads and even on the private roads that they service and maintain, it's an issue that does affect the entire population of Barnstable, and so we recognize that the state highways are maintained, managed by the state NASDOT. They have to do their own thing, but if we can influence the town of Barnstable to either modify or think about alternatives, that would be useful to all of our districts here in the town, that we could present some kind of united front instead of just petitioning the town to do something. It would be nice to have the support of our peers in other districts. So Bruce was very gracious to say that he would come down. He's got some experience statewide thinking about this for other water suppliers, and we did submit to him some questions just to provoke discussion. I don't have those questions handy. I do. Okay. So just if you could give us a quick summary of how you see this issue statewide, and how are some other places dealing with it. We did do a little summary last time we met. I don't know if this made its way to you, but we did collect some averages from the suppliers that have listed some of their results with the DEP, and our consultant Tom Cambereri is able to find those, and I kind of collated it. And then Tom has also provided us with some graphing, some point graphs showing the different water suppliers in Barnstable, where they're at with this. So, to me, sodium is, I don't want to say the easiest, but the most common contaminant in water supplies. We certainly have lots more exotic things than we're dealing with PFAS and PFOS and all the other ones. I know Hans has had experience with that in recent years, but it seems like something that we should be able to do some preventative work on. So
I'll just add maybe, I wonder if, much like nitrate being a indicator of other things like wastewater, I'm wondering if sodium road salts. Plenty of other stuff coming off the roads if you go looking for it, like, benzene, toluene, xylene, all that good stuff, which we don't test for. Well, we do test for it occasionally. But I'm just wondering if it, sodium might be an indicator of other stuff too.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I'll just give a quick background of where I'm coming from. So my background is in environmental science and city planning. So I worked as a land use manager for a town of Northampton. In the beginning of my career, the last 15 years, I worked as a water resource planner for Master Water. Part of that is working across the entire state, putting together basically watershed protection plans all across the state. And that means identifying issues in watersheds and coming up with solutions. I'll say that every watershed in Massachusetts, one of the solutions is to reduce salt. So when I say salt, I'd love to change the kind of vernacular of this meeting from sodium to sodium and chloride. And because it's actually strange. I've been working in other states recently, and I just came back from Michigan. We were out in Michigan. I've been out there twice this year. I was just up in New Hampshire doing work. Every other state, when we talk about this, it's chlorides. Chlorides only. Nobody talks about sodium. And in Massachusetts, every town talks about sodium levels are rising in sodium, but almost nobody talks about chlorides.
Just thank you for saying, I'm going to jump in here because I've noticed that too. I don't think we have any chloride TMDLs in Massachusetts, but New Hampshire, it's like all over the place.
New Hampshire,
really
Michigan, New York. Yeah. I don't know why we don't. And chlorides are the real culprit here that are. Chlorides are sodium's terrible, but if you go to Michigan and you say sodium, someone says, well, put less salt in your soup. We're talking chlorides here, okay? And I know the Cape has always been sensitive on sodium because of saltwater spray, saltwater intrusion. There's a lot of, but chlorides are what kill the zooplankton that eat our phytoplankton that cause basically algae. And I know you guys have algae problems down here, but having worked down here, having the pleasure of working down here with Scott on the watershed plan and with Jen and Chris, I've gotten pretty familiar with this area. And chlorides will, everybody's familiar with Flint, right? Flint changed their water source. When they went to a river, it was pulling in chlorides. That's what caused the damage. That's a big cause of the damage in the pipe. They were adding chlorides for flagging, but also the chlorides from the river basically just chewed the pipe away. All the orthophosphate that they put in the pipes that lined the pipes chewed it up and took the lead out. And that was like the main issue. So chlorides are really the big culprit. Sodium, certainly don't underestimate it, and it is an issue. But I think they should be tied together in any discussion. And then just using one more example, chlorides are where you're going to get your money and your regulations, and sodium, it just isn't there, right? So the MS4 permits that all your towns on the Cape just did, right? Your stormwater permits. If you had a chloride impaired water, your town was required to do a salt reduction plan. You guys have several impaired waters in Cotuit, maybe like in Barnstable, maybe 24 impaired waters. None of them show chlorides, but I would bet almost all of them are chloride impaired if you started testing them. And that would have required a salt reduce plan for every department on the Cape, right? So if you started testing for chlorides, that's where the money's going to be. That's where the regulations are going to be. So
just to be clear, this is in freshwater. You're talking.
So freshwater. So the MS4 permit is your municipal sewerage separate sewers system. ORETS is there. So basically, that says any town that discharges to freshwater resources must come up with these MS4 stormwater plans. In these plans, you have you know, how you're gonna deal with stormwater. If you're impaired waters, how are you gonna deal with nitrates? How are you gonna deal with salt, sodium chlorides, things like that. And then there's money out there if you are doing, there's grant money out there to help you. And so that's available on your DPW's website.
Can we back up? So, unlike Professor Horsley, I'm just a layman. I'm just a little English
He's an English major.
I forget, Scott kind of looks down and was like, oh, geez, this again,
But so here's the thing. Do we test for chlorides? Have we ever tested for chlorides? The very first was here.
I don't know if that's part of our testing or not. It's good. Do you know, Mark?
I think you do. I think everybody has to test because it's a secondary, according to EPA, it's a secondary MCL. Which means you test for it, but there's nothing that you have to.
But is it a public health issue as opposed to sodium? We know is
it is.
They both are.
They both are. So yeah, chlorides.
In addition, chlorides are an ecological issue, correct?
It's a bigger ecological issue,
right.
but it can be a public health issue too. One
Is
for
it
less,
easier,
right?
is it easier to test for sodium? Is that why we're doing sodium?
No, chlorides.
Well, chlorides are easier to test for.
You know, let me, can mention, Mark walked in a little late, Mark Nelson here. And, you know, one of the things that Bruce mentioned is other states like Michigan and New Hampshire, they have chloride TMDLs all over the place, but we don't have any in Massachusetts. Have you run into that? I have one. It's an interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, even, sorry, Mark.
do we use sodium as an indicator of chloride?
It's definitely an indicator, so sure, and you know, most of this stuff a lot of it comes from road salt, right?
Yeah.
And the road salt that we use is mostly sodium. It's the majority of what we use in every state is sodium chloride. So yeah, if there's sodium, there's chloride. Generally, when you put it down, it breaks down. You know, sodium ions go one way, chloride ions split and go another way. They both end up in the groundwater. Sometimes they reattach.
So we do have a water super here. Do you test for chlorides in Hyannis?
Careful answer would be yes. I just checked, you know, for the inorganics, the IOCs that we test for, and it's not there. Sodium is there.
I know lots of towns will publish it on their.
But what I,
consumer
you know,
conference.
I don't really deal with testing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So it's on my notes to
So like,
talk to the guys at
Sorry.
the office
Okay, so-
to find out what the deal is.
We're gonna give you all the time.
yeah.
Mark, did you have? Why don't you sit up here because we appreciate your attendance, sir. Mark is a hydrogeologist that's well known on the Cape. He's not an English major, so he just said. What was your point?
I can't use the right words. I'm not an English major. I just was, you know, most systems are also chlorinated, the drinking water system. So is that one of the reasons it's not tested as often? Because it's added to the drinking water?
Don't ask me, I don't know.
Yeah.
Plus, what we do is we basically, as water operators, do what's being told, which is
Yeah.
our Mass DEP water quality schedule. That's
Right.
where we test
Right.
it. What we test for, how we test for, how often.
Sure.
So Mass DEP tells us what we need to test for.
And is the treatment more chlorine as opposed to chloride, which?
Well, that could get into a deep question. And are the levels that are being added to the drinking water anywhere near some of the threat levels to, you know, water quality?
Chlorine is a disinfectant.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a moot point.
So, you know, using one more example is, if your well is contaminated by Mass DOT, and you file a complaint against Mass DOT, they look at your sodium levels. And they generally only replace a well if somebody is compromised, immunocompromised, with a kind of I don't know what you call it. I guess their sodium sensitive. But if it's chlorides and it's above a certain level, they'll instantly just go into replacing your water or replacing your well or whatever.
You're
you're
talking primarily private domestic wells, so I would imagine.
These are also town.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay,
so
that's it.
in Western Mass, we've had a lot of wells replaced by Mass DOT.
Okay, okay.
I will say, just throwing it out there, while I'm talking about Mass DOT, they're doing great things right now to improve their salt reduction, and improve their road maintenance programs. We can get into that if you like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to start by saying, this.
Oh, that's good.
So are you recommending that, as water commissioners, we should include chlorides in our testing?
Absolutely.
Well, that's,
Action number one.
I've learned one thing, I can leave now. Let's learn more.
Well, thank you. I'm done here.
If it's in the secondaries, I do think we can test for it, but.
I'm pretty sure you're required to test for it, but not publish it in your CCM.
Okay.
Can we rule out intrusion? I know that our southernmost well, if we're at full capacity, will pull harbor water into the system.
Okay.
Yeah, that. If
That's
we're-
that's the ocean right there.
Yeah, and so if that's not at full capacity, we'll start to pull salt out of it, Crystal.
Oh, Crystal.
So we don't run it, that's like, it rarely goes over percent. But has there been any historical trends of saltwater intrusion of the Cape?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look back, going back to the, and I'm not a hydrogeologist, but I do understand, somewhat, especially the Cape, since I worked down here. And if you look back in the 70s, going all the way back to the 70s, I mean, in Yarmouth and P-Town, I mean, they were pulling in, their sodium levels were 1800, 2000 parts per million. They were pulling in seawater, and so I'm assuming everybody's kind of familiar with the 6 lenses of the Cape. You guys probably learned that in elementary school here. But if you look at the upper lenses in P-Town, they're not even using that anymore. If it's my understanding is it's just pulling it into saltwater.
Yeah, they get all that from all their water sources from Florida.
Yeah, there's an interesting study that just came out in Plymouth from UMass. It was just last year where they did test wells, and they did saltwater intrusion with 1 to 6 feet of sea level by 2100 is what they're estimating, and they showed the saltwater moving in it was anywhere between 100 and 500 meters in, which would make your well basically useless.
This is our well number 3, closest to the water. It's not actually taking harbor water. It's sucking into the salt water lens.
Salt ground.
Salt groundwater. Because it's the fresh water is thinner there because it's closer to the coast.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we noticed when we looked at the scatter plots, all but one of our wells is south of the highway.
Yeah.
And then we looked at our neighbor, Marston's Mills, water department. Their well field is all up in here.
Yep.
Much like half the. So with the gradient northwest, southeast in the lens,
Yeah.
are we valid in assuming that maybe because we're below the highway and in the path of any runoff, that we're getting more than they are above the highway?
Most likely. I mean, I'm not a hydrogeologist, but
Groundwater flow is definitely that direction.
groundwater flows from Route 6, basically Route 6 right to
And Route 28.
the bay, and then the bay, and then Route 6 to the sound, the other way.
This is Route 28 over here, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
This is the state highway.
and I think a factor too is not just the state roads, but the number of other roads just up gradient from those wells compared to what's up gradient of Com's wells, because all the roads get salted.
Right.
And Barnstable, I think, has tried to use a better compound. I was trying to look it up to remember. I think it's less sodium. It might be like chlorine, calcium,
I talked to Sean Jones this morning. He's the highway department
but I
director.
think it still has chloride in it.
Yeah, it's magnesium chloride. And they've been using it not every year, he said, but occasionally they do use it. And we can discuss those options too, if I ever stop talking about this.
So a number of other towns, if they are above this recommended health advisory limit of 20 milligrams per liter. What do? Do they have a reporting requirement to the state? Is DEP gonna get after them?
Well, it's a guideline. Massachusetts, the 20 is a guideline, and for the EPA is 30, which is also a guideline. So there's no like action that you have to take. There is an action that you have to take. If it's above the 20, you have to report it to your Board of Health. But you have to report your whole CCR anyway to your Board of Health. So I'm not sure that's really an effective strategy to reducing or notifying the public. But yeah, it's a guideline, and it ranges throughout the state.
Well, let's say if I was in my house and I'm salt sensitive, hypertension or something, can I add a filter? Does that work?
No,
Nothing works. Not even at our
Reverse osmosis.
you can do reverse osmosis in your house, and it's expensive. First of all, to put in reverse osmosis, and you could do it, right? You could spend the 10,000 on a reverse osmosis system in your house. But there's a problem with that is for depending on your system, let's say your reverse osmosis, for every gallon of water you make to drink, you might make 4, 8, 12 gallons, depending on the system, of wastewater that goes into your septic system. It's now brine, right? It's higher concentrated brine. So, good for you, not so good for everybody else.
Yeah.
So
prevention is really the key.
prevention is the key.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to prevent it is to instantly start reducing it at your DPW levels. And we could work with the DPWs across the, I could say we could pretty quickly reduce, based on what I've seen, reduce the levels by 30%. It would cost some money. But
With this, the Mass DOT has a form where public water supply can request remediation. We be looking into that as well.
I don't think you qualify, Chris. So, based on other towns that I've worked with, had wells replaced or they've taken actions to remediate the issue, you're not even close to what they would consider an issue.
So that wouldn't be persuasive to the state to say, don't spread salt on that section of Route 28. That would be for, we've got a compromise as well, we blame you, we're going to replace the well.
Yeah, I think if you had high chloride levels of 250, my guess is you're not, right?
We have
30, is that what you're looking at?
30.
Okay. Yeah. So if you had high chloride levels of 250, or if you had 500, certainly they would replace it. But somewhere in there, 250 to 500, I think they'd come in and they'd take a look at it. But the first thing they would do is they would say, just like you said, what are you doing on your local roads to reduce that, right? And they would say, well, how can you prove that it's us causing this on Route 28 when you have so many local roads and you're also salting your roads?
Well, I found a newspaper article from 2012 that said that Mass DOT had installed a new brine system in the Sagamore Depot. And apparently there's a brine solution.
Yes.
Do you know if that, we should ask Mass DOT if they're loading a truck and using that on the Cape.
I think so. I think they're using it on all over the state. I think they're using it on the Cape, but it's the problem with the Cape is, and this is what I talked to Sean this morning is brine works. It is so you take there are a lot of ways. As my daughter says, it there are 1,000 ways to paint a turtle, right? So you can use brine and you can make it out of a lot of different things. Most the DOT is mostly using regular sodium chloride salt. So you take that, you mix it in with water at it's 23.3%. You make this brine, and then you put it down on the roads. It's called anti-icing. So you do it before the storm. The problem with that on the Cape, and it works really well when it works well all over the state. It's great. It keeps the snow and ice from sticking to the ground, and then you can go through with these new plows that I'll talk to you about that I think are worth investing in. Scrape it right off. There are a lot of limitations as to when you can pre-treat the ground, so anti-ice the ground. So if you're going to get rain before the storm, you can't put it down because it just washes away.
Yeah.
If your humidity is high, you can't put it down because it becomes ineffective. It gets diluted and washes away. Because when you put down a wet salt, it takes more moisture from you, sucks it in, and the salt only works when it's moist and when it's activated. So you put down a brine, which is mostly water, and then you add more water. It just kind of just washes away. You can't put it down if it's going to be a windy storm, or you don't want to put it down because in a windy storm you don't want to attract the snow to the ground with wet salt. You want it to just blow off, right? So the Cape has a lot of limitations when it comes to brine per se as an anti-icing. Brine works on the other end, which is a de-icing, which is after you plowed. It works pretty well. It also can work as a pre-wet salt, and we can talk about that.
So that would still be putting salt down, just in lower concentrations.
Lower concentrations. So you're lowering the amount that you put down. If you start brining as a anti-icing instead of just putting rock salt down, you're dropping 30% right there. Because you only need to put down, I think it's 50 gallons per lane, whereas with rock salt, people are generally putting down 50 gallons. I can't remember. It's 2.2 pounds per gallon, so about 100 pounds. People are putting down right now about 240 pounds of rock salt in Barnstable, according to Sean. 240 pounds of rock salt per lane.
Wow. Has anybody done a study to determine how many pellets of the rock salt end up bouncing off into the woods?
Yeah. So that's
what I see all the time.
well, that's what pre-wetting is about, and that's something I think that Barnstable should be doing that you're not doing. And I talked to Sean about that this morning. So when you put down rock salt, the studies that I've read show that straight rock salt, it bounces and scatters, right? And you lose about 30% of it, right? You're right. It hits and bounces and it rolls off. When you pre-wet it, which you use about 8 to 10 gallons, and you can pre-wet it with all sorts of things. You can pre-wet it with water, you can pre-wet it with brine, you can pre-wet it with calcium chlorides or magnesium chlorides, and that'll bring down calcium will bring down the temperature of your salt level, and magnesium, which will work on the road. So typical sodium chloride, which we use mostly, won't work below like 15 degrees. It just doesn't melt. Calcium and magnesium will work down to 6 degrees, maybe even lower sometimes. And
So it's actually more effective.
it's way more
And
effective
it should be safer.
and safer, and
Which one, the calcium and the magnesium?
Magnesium and calcium, right?
yeah, way more effective.
How much more costly are they?
It's a lot.
Is it double or triple? Or?
Well, if you were to go with straight, rock salt is like $70-80 a ton. If you were to buy straight magnesium or chloride or calcium chloride, you're talking 500
Ooh,
a ton.
times 8 or something.
You can get a treated rock salt, which is, they call like a premium rock salt, which is sodium chloride that has magnesium or calcium kind of mixed in with it for maybe like 100, 110 a ton, which is better. Or you could buy calcium and magnesium liquid, and you can mix and make your own.
Did you say something was $500 a ton?
If you were to buy straight calcium, and there are drawbacks to all of these. None of these are great, right? First of all, they're all salts. So they all have chlorides, right? Second of all, calcium and magnesium just don't taste good. So they don't taste good in your water.
You can taste it.
Oh yeah, at low quantities.
Really?
Once it gets into your drinking water, it tastes bad.
Huh.
And sodium, you can taste it at like they say you can taste it around 200 parts per million. You can actually taste it salt.
Wow.
It tastes bad, but there's a magnesium and calcium talking low like 40 parts per million.
Wow.
And so once you have it, you know it. Like there's no way to get it out. Really.
So I just thought of it, if I may. I was in Dan Santos's office a couple of winters ago, and he showed snow plowing software, which is pretty impressive. He knew they had each truck, and so what I'm thinking of is in the ag field, precision farming, where we're trying to reduce nutrients. They have a guy, an onboard computer with GIS and optimizing the application. Is there something like that going on at DOT?
Oh yeah, DOT is doing a great study on that. They're creating their own software. Yeah, and there's something called they're using all sorts of great stuff. It's technology, right? So technology isn't perfect. But
is that something that is, I don't know if they use that in Barnstable, something like that? I mean, no.
I doubt it.
What's that?
I talked to
Just seeing the
Sean.
trucks that.
Yeah, I talked to Sean yesterday. I told him you'd be calling. So, but he was, I kind of talked to him about this and that I would be here, and I wouldn't say anything. Because the reality is, I deal with drinking water, he's in charge of highways, so, yeah, I wouldn't want him talking about drinking water.
Sure.
But he basically said, yeah, Mass Highway, Mass DOT, they have pretty much state-of-the-art equipment, and the town doesn't have that yet.
So what I'm trying to get a fix on is looking at the mass. I mean, somebody got E28, trying to get a sense of, be interested to know from a loading perspective. What percent comes from the town roads versus public? The other component, we have one of our wells, Bill 5, there, right next to a pretty high-end private development that we've talked to. When they get their permit, it says no salting, but who knows if they're doing that. So really 3 sectors, right? You get private roads, you get the town roads, and state roads. It'd be interesting to know where's it coming from and who has the technology.
Yeah, and just, I don't mean to be negative, but just experiencing the town road salting the last 2 winters, there's been issues. Like I've seen on my road a pile about like this. It's not spray. So they hit a bump or something, and the equipment needs to be looked at a little bit. It was all over West Barnstable. There was,
I believe
easily
that has a
over a
lot to
ton
do with an
spilled.
experience also. I mean, when they come to a stop sign, you're supposed to turn that off.
right.
And I think a lot of times if you sit there at the stop sign, you just watch it building up, or something, like if they don't keep going.
I think the Jack Daniels has anything to do with it.
Well,
that's where Scott's
I cannot
Scott's
confirm or
experience
deny
comes
any
in.
of that.
Scott's Jack Daniel's experience, yeah.
Chris,
Cold out there,
Chris, before Chris got here, we started the discussion about the fact that we're doing all this sodium testing, and Bruce is telling us that in other states, it's chlorides that are, running the show in terms of concern. And we don't seem to be testing much for chloride because DEP doesn't require. Is that
Okay.
Is that right?
How often do we test the chlorides?
If it's hidden in one of our, secondaries or something, I believe we do a secondary voluntary every year, I believe it is. And we might have just did it.
Yeah, true times. But 30, this is pretty low level. Well,
Or,
Are you familiar with
oh, okay.
the results of, I understand they declared around Quabbin.
Sodium is IOC.
Yeah, so,
They've done a lot.
I have it here.
oh, okay.
I didn't have secondaries.
Right.
Trying to protect the response. Have they seen any reduction?
No.
Huge.
Yeah.
They've seen huge reductions. So the DCR is really protecting the Quabbin and the Wachusett Reservoir. They're doing a great job. You can see on their MS4s because they're testing their streams for chlorides. They're required to do salt reduction plans. You can see them online. And then they're starting to use these new technologies. So for instance, some very simple things you can do, town, and I caution anything you do, that you work with the DPW, obviously, and you work with your town lawyers, because, what my understanding is, anytime you start doing this, reductions, you have liability, right? So like New Hampshire, Connecticut, they have these snow pro certifications where drivers and DPW workers, superintendents, they all go in and they have to get certified. And then they're covered under certain insurances. And they're really good trainings. I've been to the one in New Hampshire. It's a great training. And like Connecticut has, they use about 150,000 tons of salt on their roads. Massachusetts only has about 10% more roads, lane miles than Connecticut. We use 450,000 to about half a million tons. So we use 3 times as much as Connecticut, and we only have 10% more roads. Connecticut, and most of these towns in Connecticut, they're all certified. They have to be certified. We don't have certification in Massachusetts.
Certification for whom? The drivers?
The drivers, the superintendents, department heads, yeah.
I just came back from Connecticut and I noticed the entering public water supply area on the highways.
Yeah.
So they're trying to.
And private. All the private people have to, and now they're required to show, most of the private guys up in New Hampshire, they have cameras on their cars. And they're showing, here's how much I put down, here's when I did it, so that they're not sued, and 2, they're not putting down too much and being blamed for ruining the drinking water. And then every town superintendent, DPW, they're required to come up with a salt reduction plan. They're required to train their workers, and they're required to do an annual audit of how much they used, where they used it. It's a big deal. We're not there yet, Massachusetts.
Okay, so you're talking about all that they're doing in Connecticut and Massachusetts, there's no certification.
Nothing in Massachusetts.
Around here in the Cape, we always see signs in recent years, new plow drivers needed, and there's a shortage of plow,
right?
Private people being contracted in. If they have to get a certification, that's going to be a disincentive for getting more plow drivers, but
it's definitely difficult. But there's no easy.
And with the price of a plow, if you're a private guy, and we don't have any snow anymore.
I know.
Right.
And you don't have a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And when was the last time you saw a state vehicle actually plowing Route 28?
Good point. Oh, contractors.
It's all contractors. Everything's contracted out. They all sit down, stop and shop and wait till they're told to go. And then they all go out one way and go as far as they can on their route, then sit there, and then they come back and park till they're told to go out again. And there's usually 3 to 4 in line doing it as they're going.
So whereas the DCR guys that you're talking about, DCR is paying for these new plows, which they're called live edge plows. They're incredible. I talked to a lot of people who use them on the private sector. Private sector is always ahead of the game. But these plows, they look like So they look like, right now you have your plow, and then you have a little blade that goes across, and it's steel or it's rubber. And these new ones, you have the plow, and then it's a segmented plow blade like this, and they're on these little, kind of almost like a spring, which they move up and down, and these segments are made of a rubber encased carbon. And so when you go over a bump of this, if the road is kind of humped or you're not getting all the snow right here or right here. But when you go over a bump of this one drops, this one drops, this one drops. So you're getting all of that snow, and it's amazing. So the best way to reduce your salt right from the beginning is plowing. Plowing, mechanical means are the absolute best way to reduce your salt. And these plow blades, they cost like so a typical steel plow blade costs like what they say is about $100 a foot. So it was $1,200 for a 12-foot plow. These other ones are more like $500 a foot, but they last 4 times as long. And the amount of salt you save by just taking that. I've met with guys who say they'll drive behind a steel plow and they'll still have, while they're plowing, they'll still have a full plow behind them, and they'll take it right down to the cement. You can't even use them on a soil or on a dirt road. It takes the dirt right off.
Well,
they're amazing, and everybody should be using them. Every department should have them, and I don't know how DCR is subsidizing towns in their watershed to buy them, and they pay off quickly in man hours and salt.
how expensive is the salt? How much does Barnstable spend on salt? What would be your guess per year?
So talking to Sean, he said you guys use about 7,000 tons of salt.
How much is it per ton?
It's about $70 to $100.
So that's
70 to 100,000.
So
how much?
70,000.
70 grand a year, so
No, 700.
that's what I was thinking. So that was kind of my question. If we save 30% of
Save money.
700 grand, that's $200,000.
Yeah.
You can buy some technology for that, right?
Yeah, I worked with Granby Next. They were using 25,000 tons when I started working there. They put in these GPS units in their vehicles. This was 15 years ago. They put GPS units in their vehicles. They programmed the roads to their GPS.
Yeah.
And so they said on a straightaway, you put down X amount. They put down 100 pounds per lane, no, only 100. So on a straight road, you put down 100. On a curve, you put down X times 1.2, right? On a curve on a hill, you put X times 2 or whatever it is. They did it for every road in town, and then they have these temperature sensors that they drive, where you can drive around. You can hook it to your car where you plow, and you can drive around town, and it'll tell you the pavement, and it logs it. It's how the pavement temperature, so you know where your cold spots are that are out of the sun, or if you're coming up on a 4-way stop. You want to put a little more salt down up there, but back further, you don't need to. So they basically programmed it in. In 1 year, they went from 25,000 tons to 5.
And then those units,
1 year.
those units also have stop signs, they shut the standards off automatically.
Automatically, they shut them down. They're based on speed. So if you're going faster, but you don't want to go too fast because it spreads further. But 20, so they cut down 20,000 tons in 1 year, and they paid for this stuff in 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, this was a town government?
Yeah, town government.
Which town?
Granby.
Granby.
Yeah, they had big problems with their wells, which are located right along the main route. And so they are constantly updating their salt reduction plan, reducing salt, reevaluating, and no issues with.
So let's talk about these salt reduction plans. Are they required by the state?
They're not.
So
In Connecticut, So,
Well, they are around Auburn and in Wachusett and Sudbury and those reservoirs.
They are, because when they did their MS4 permit, they had chloride impaired waters.
So chloride is what kidney through.
Yeah, so if you have a chloride impaired water, you're required to do a salt reduction plan for your whole town, with your MS4. And you could prove that you have chloride impaired waters, I'm sure.
Wouldn't it make sense to take a regional approach for the Cape rather than have all 15 towns try to tackle this on their own?
I think it's great. I would love to be part of it. I think, because for instance, we're talking about brine, right? Why would every town need to make their own brine? Why not have one big generator and everybody shows up and fills their tanks? And then, why not have sand, a giant sand pile? Some towns don't use sand because sand has been shown pretty much useless if you put it down on snow, right? But sand works really well if it's -10, because salt doesn't melt at -10. So you put sand down on freezing rain or really cold paving. So why not share that, right?
Are there any Cape towns that are doing anything innovative in this area that you know?
I don't know a lot about the Cape because not a lot of this is published, right? And then talking to DPW directors is, Sean has a really tough job as a DPW highway superintendent. He has 20 crews out on any storm, so 20 trucks. He's keeping track of their routes, and they have these. I think they have GPSs in their vehicle, so he's kind of trying to keep track just to make sure people are doing their route right. And it's a lot, and it's not an easy answer, but I think some simple things like upgrading your plows, right, or having some of those, or
my sense is Barnstable might be a really good candidate for this GIS system here, just because they're pretty savvy on this stuff, and like they already have the tracking program for the trucks.
Yeah.
My sense is that they might be, interested, especially if you can show that in a couple, 3 years, they're gonna save the money back, right?
Yeah, it can happen fast.
How much is that GIS stuff you're talking about? Any idea how much that would cost to set up a town?
I know, there's a company called Vaisala. It's VAISALA. They make a device called the MD30. You can put it on a plow, you can put it on a Prius and drive around. It takes the pavement temperature, it takes the dew point, it puts together what they call a grip analysis. So it'll figure out how much grip there is on the ground. And then it can feed those GPS units in every truck.
That's so cool.
Right from your Prius or whatever you want to drive around in your truck. And you're driving around and taking these, and then it creates trends. It knows where the cold spots are. And so, the future of these trucks is that people are just driving. There's no adjusting knobs and opening and closing like you said, Chris.
Things on and off.
You forget to close your knob at the stop sign and there's a pile of salt like this. And that goes right down into your waterways.
The contractors versus the town-owned vehicles is an issue with the cost-saving stuff.
That's an issue for
You
sure.
have to work that
So
through.
you need to fit this equipment onto each contractor's truck, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Is it something that's easy to attach? Or do you need to like?
So
It's
do
easy.
the contractors use their own plows?
I think so, yeah.
They do, but I don't believe they contract out sanding. I think sanding or salting is just through the town of Barnstable.
Don't ask me.
I was just looking, I wasn't asking, I was just staring while I was saying it.
That's the
I'm just a water guy.
I just mentioned it.
Same here, I'm just going by, what I see out there that's doing the sanding usually.
So let's.
Unless it's for the state I always see private, but in the actual town of Barnstable, it's usually the town of Barnstable trucks that are doing that are regular, I think that they're regulating it themselves, they don't put that out to private cars. Plowing, they will put out to, private roads and stuff like that, like, hey, you have these 10 roads, make sure they're clean during a storm. Because I've had everywhere from landscapers to the actual town and doing my road that I, but I've never seen anybody sanding unless they were in town of hospital truck.
Okay.
So, Hans wanting to be quiet because he
Because
works,
he's smart.
he works, he works for the man, but this is why we're here. Is that he
Yeah.
works for the man.
Yeah, it sounds to me though that it might be a good idea to invite Sean or the DPW
That's what I was
director
gonna say.
down and have a conversation with him about all the nuts and bolts about salting.
Right.
What I think is important is not to get too deep into the woods about salting and sanding. Just make sure we look at the big picture and keep on looking at the big picture. Because salt and snow removal is only one piece of this puzzle. And I don't think you're gonna end up in a perfect world. But, you probably, if you pick and choose what you do and you really focus on the variety of issues, then after 5 or 10 years, you probably can see some results. And the other part of it is too, okay, but that's more the mechanics of it, is you can tackle a problem by splitting it up into smaller problems, starting to solve each small problems, but you also need to, how do you keep a finger on the pulse of, how do you check after 5 or 10 years, is what you're doing successful or not? So you need to, besides dealing with the problem, you also need to keep on testing every year or every 5 years and do an evaluation of, is what we're doing working, yes or no? And if not, what are we gonna do about it?
That's why I was wondering about the relative, where's it coming from? Because we can continue testing sodium and chloride and show that maybe it goes down a little, but we won't know whether that's the town doing a better job or the DOT or some of the private guys.
Well, of course, the town's gonna do that.
So I agree. What we should do is just have a conversation
Yeah.
to learn more about what is the process, the system, the equipment, the
Yeah.
manpower, the costs, and just information from John and whoever else is in charge over there. And start building more of this information before we write a letter saying stop using salt.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, this is a political issue as well. And right now we have a town council, the elected leaders. We don't have select boards. We have a town council now, which runs the town.
It's like a city, but it's a town.
Yeah, right. Well, we have a very heightened sensitivity about water quality, and they just appointed this guy to be the chair of the new water quality advisory committee for the whole town. Looking at really comprehensive wastewater plan and what else.
That's it. That's all. That's enough.
But we know that the town councilors, the elected officials, are really keen about this now. And so, if we come up with something that makes sense.
Yeah, there's receptivity.
We just go to the council. We don't necessarily have to plead with the DPW to change something. Just tell the town council, you told us you were concerned about water quality. Here's a significant concrete step that we can take right now. It may cost a little more, but put your money where your mouth is. If it's water quality, here's something we can do. And but I think we're not there yet. We need to get more of this information, see how cooperative DPW would be. I'm really surprised today. So second thing I learned is that we've been kind of beating up Mass DOT and absentia. That sounds like they may be more enlightened about this stuff than the towns are. So sometimes
Making great strides,
Are those strides being made statewide, do you think, or just in the areas? Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering if they were more focused on like the Quabbin area, but you think it's statewide?
It's statewide.
Okay.
Yeah, they're doing the anti-icing, which is the pre-treating before the storm. They're doing salt reductions. They're using these RWIS systems, these Maybe you've seen them along the highway, they have little solar panels on them and a little camera. So those are they're constantly updating pavement temperature, pavement, and they're doing these, they're using thermal imaging along the roads. So they'll know, what the road temperatures are. They're using grip mapping. And I mean, they've come a long way. They're creating their own GIS systems.
Given the cost numbers you threw out there, I think we calculated 700 grand for the. This is some real money.
It's really,
Think about what that number is statewide, so this is good, just economic incentives, really.
yeah, absolutely. And it seems to only be going up, right? A few years ago, you could get salt for $50 a ton. Now it's 80, and if you're lucky.
So, I'm sure the finance director of the town of Barnstable would disagree with me, but this town is a wealthy town, has money, has resources.
Yeah.
And, if they have to spend a little to save more, it seems to me that this town is better poised to do that than Truro.
Hey, Truro.
And just two thoughts. One is if there is ability to make some changes that have a positive water quality benefit, there could be some grant money hiding someplace that could support that. Because there's so many technical assistance and water emerging contaminant type grants that EPA has out there right now. And I'd be happy to talk further about that and find some contacts to learn. And the other is, I'm also on the West Barnstable Water Commission where we have all
This doesn't
private
point out
wells.
whether they don't have a water supply.
Right, it's a very complex job,
Is that a paid position?
but it's the road salting for all those private wells is incredibly valuable too. So if there's collaboration that's worthwhile, we'd be open to it. It's just
That's true, private wells. Yeah.
seeing my neighbor have his well casing rebuilt within 8 feet of the road. So,
They almost all are.
yeah, it's uphill, but who knows? And he's got sodium. Who knows about chloride? But so if there's collaboration to get more of the water systems interested in this, we could talk about that.
And there used to be, I think we asked, there used to be a Barnstable County Utilities Association. Is that still active?
Still out there, yeah.
Water
Oh, yeah.
suppliers meet
It's out there.
regularly?
Yes.
They meet Monday.
They're like,
For a meeting. But they're still out there. We don't meet monthly anymore or anything like that. It's more like, they'll throw us, someone will have an event that we'll have a little meeting before on.
Well, maybe, get this guy back down to that group. Cause I think the idea of regionalizing makes sense.
Yeah, yep.
Why wouldn't you use the Cape Cod Commission for that? Cause I'm more thinking a programmatic approach versus.
I don't know if they'd get into that, though.
Well, isn't that one of their core missions?
Water quality,
Yeah, but their water quality coordinator that lives in Iowa, he zooms in everywhere.
Well, you can't be on the advisory board then.
Let me ask you another thing. So the salt reduction plans exist, mostly out near the Quabbin. When you have chloride impairment problems that are found during an MS4 permit. So we could look at what salt reduction plans look like. Sure. And what kind of things they're recommending. I mean, we could do our own little salt reduction plan that makes sense for Decatur, just.
Maybe you could recommend one that might be a good sample.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That'd
And
be
there's
great.
a ton of information on the Mass Gov website about what DCR is doing around Quabbin. They've got all sorts of buffer zones and
I wonder if it'd be,
storage prohibitions, and certain things within a certain distance.
just wondering, it might be hard to sell town of Barnstable on what DOT is doing statewide versus a town that's doing a really good job.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's better.
So he said Granby was one that's
Yeah.
looking at technology.
Granby has done a great job. They have a very simple plan on their website. It's not really even a salt reduction plan. It's just like a maintenance plan. And I think every town that did an MS4 has Barnstable has. It says on the maintenance plan, how much you generally use, where you store it, That was one thing that I noticed right away, is that it looked like Barnstable gets about 7,000 tons, but only stores,
Yeah.
4,000 tons under a salt shed, so 3,000 get stored out on the parking lot.
Well, they have a shed at the transfer station. Do they have one at the DPW barn too?
Yes,
I believe so.
So where is it
Yes.
uncovered?
yeah, but it sounded like the DPW barn holds maybe about 3,800 tons. And then the shed holds a couple hundred tons, and then the other 3,000 sit on parking lots.
I wonder which.
Are you sure about that?
That's what it says on your plan.
That it sits out on a parking lot?
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Can't imagine.
Because normally what I do know is that like halfway, actually most of the time after the first or the second storm, and you know, some of the salt shed, the quantity of stored materials is on the roads now. They resupply during one season.
Okay,
So it could be that even though the total storage volume of the storage shed is less than the totally used, it doesn't automatically mean that it's stored outside. But if it says in the plan
it does.
that it does, then yeah, what can I
It
say?
says, I printed it, but I didn't bring it. But it's on your website, on the
Okay.
DPW website, and it says 3,800 tons under the original salt shed, approximately 200 or 400 under the farm, and the rest is stored in the open parking lot. But that may not be the case anymore. That's
Okay.
what's on the
That's not
website. It should be stored under a building. That's kind of like step one, right? And maybe there just wasn't enough room. You have a lot of lane miles. You have, I can't remember the number, but it's 350 plus lane miles in Barnstable alone, which is a lot. I mean, you have a lot of trucks out there, but simple things I think could easily be implemented. The plows, I think that's huge. Pre-wetting can be done on a truck. You can rehab a retrofit truck for $12,000 to have little tanks on the side that spray saline solution or water or calcium and magnesium on the salt before it gets sprayed.
So it doesn't bounce.
So it doesn't bounce, and it doesn't take much. It's 8, 10 gallons per ton. You can do it with a hose. Back at the DPW, there are a lot of ways to do it that you can quickly reduce your salt. And then there's, technology. I know that Mass DOT requires the closed loop controllers in their cars even for their the guys that they hire outside of Mass DOT. I think Sean said that he requires a open loop controller in the vehicle. So a open loop controller is basically a GPS, so he knows where everybody's located.
Yeah.
But it still means the operator still has to adjust how much salt comes out and when. A closed loop controller will can automatically dump salt based on your speed, and there are GPS units, and then there's advanced systems that are far more advanced than that pick up. They dump based on your road conditions. They dump based on where you are. And so there are a lot of options.
I guess I want to ask again about your impression is that Barnstable doesn't have any onboard controls. It's up to each operator to adjust as they go. I mean, what is your guess on how careful in general these guys? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the incentives are. If I'm out there not knowing this stuff, I'm not a water quality guy, I put a little more down just because make people safe. And I don't know. I guess I'm skeptical about how well this is done. And I'm not trying to be critical of anybody. I'm just thinking, I don't know. And is there any sense of how careful these people are in
Yeah,
general.
I mean, you know, we're all humans,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And, the
There's no
more,
great way to follow up and see how someone did either, unless you're 100 feet
Right.
behind them.
Right.
So
I'm in favor of this GPS thing. I think that'd be interesting
I
as
think
a
it's
cost.
great, yeah.
Think.
So one thing I've heard anecdotally is, somebody who talks to upper management. Is that the town got severely criticized a few years ago for some surprise storm. They didn't do a good job on the roads.
They undersalt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so now they're
Yeah.
overcompensating.
Sure.
You can ask Sean, any DPW superintendent, highway division, they'll tell you they get, you know, 400 complaints a year about not enough salt, but no one ever calls and says, hey, there's sodium in my water. Or they never get that, right? So
I could do that. I just had it tested, so.
there you go. You can be the first.
The interesting part is the highway supervisor doesn't get those calls. The salt in the water, it's water superintendents get those. It's a different department.
Different department. And as you guys know, you're always responsible for cleaning up the mess, right? PFAS, nitrates, salt, sodium, salt, lead, copper.
You're gonna take it all off.
Fill in the blank, you know, everybody pollutes and then you have to deal with it. And that's, you know, that's the downside of being on the end of the.
That's why we're here today.
You're here.
I don't know if you guys talk too much. Hans's levels are a lot. You have higher levels than us at certain stations. I mean, like I said, I think our highest is like 32.
How high is?
Hans is,
Probably double of that,
Didn't we come up with some rough theories on that?
not everywhere,
Is that down gradient of the parking lot?
but there's a couple.
The pound of salt.
Yeah, no, there's,
It's over the wheels.
Right.
Cover the pile.
no, build a bigger barn. But anyways, yeah, my levels are higher. And in Hyannis, we basically dealt with this or were aware of this issue since 2008.
Which wells are these? Whereabouts are
We have basically 3 different locations where we have wells in the Mary Dunn area, which is north of the airport.
Yeah.
We have in the Hyannisport area with the Hyannisport well, Simmons
that's
Pond,
right.
and then
That's
2 straightaway wells.
Yep.
They're in a cluster. And then we have the 3 Maha wells, which
That's
are
right. Yeah, we know
close
that.
to where used
Well,
to
these
be
are all-
the Kama plant.
These are all areas, where there's a lot of roads.
Yeah.
And then except for.
Our-
Mary Dunn.
Our basically highest levels are in the Hyannisport, Simmons Pond straightaway area.
Makes sense. A lot of roads there, right?
Yeah, and those levels are, but the tricky part here is that we don't think we have saltwater intrusion.
No.
So when we pump the water out of the well, we call it a raw water,
Yeah.
okay? There's a certain sodium level in there then. Then we use certain treatments. And one of them is corrosion control. We use sodium hydroxide. And
Right.
that brings up, it adds sodium to the water, not a lot, but still, it adds it. We use chlorine, we are a chlorinated system,
Right.
so, the chlorine.
Does the airport use road salt on the runways? They must, I'm sure they do.
I don't
They
know,
de-ice.
I'm just a water guy.
Sorry, I shouldn't look at you when I have something.
The airport is another town department.
You got it.
What are you crazy?
we do the same thing with us, and we're only one, like a 20 to a 21 between our raw and our treated.
Yes.
And we put in a lime slurry actually, so, it's, and then the chlorine has a little bit of salt in it, so.
Yeah.
So we do notice a very slight, but not a lot, not one that would make you go, oh my gosh, we gotta stop adding that.
Yeah.
I remember what I was gonna say. So, back to our original thing about fluoride concerns. Is there a recommended testing regime frequency for fluoride? I mean, we've been doing sodium almost every month for a while, haven't we? But we haven't.
Don't they have to, if we go above 20?
I can review it right now, take a peek, you know, before the end of the week, and when we get together again next month, give you a report on what our last reports are on it.
I mean, maybe
We
we
see
see
if it's a trend at all there or anything.
if we could slow down on the sodium and do it quarterly instead of monthly, and
We're doing quarterly now.
put the okay, well,
Yeah.
put the money that we save on a little less testing on sodium, put it into chlorides.
Chloride testing is really inexpensive. And you can buy, something I would recommend is testing your surface waters.
We're all ground.
But no, I'm saying not even.
Oh, you mean
Not
here?
even your drinking water, but your streams, your ponds, and you'll see that one thing that chloride does is salt water is heavier, more dense than fresh water. So what we're seeing in a lot of lakes in the Northeast is the chlorides, salts will get into ponds and it'll sink to the bottom. And they're stopping ponds from doing their normal turnover.
Yeah.
Some ponds do twice a year, some do once a year. So when you can test chlorides in a pond based on depth, and it just keeps increasing as you go lower and lower. And so now you're having die-offs, and you're getting less and less oxygen, and you're seeing more in algae. I know that algae is an issue down here, cyanobacteria, and that's chlorides. They sink to the bottom. They stop that pond from turning. They kill the oxygen. They kill everything in ponds. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing the chlorides are killing the zooplankton, which eat the phytoplankton that make the algae. Chlorides are a big issue. Chlorides are changing the sex of frogs. Frogs are getting chlorides and drinking the water, and it literally changes their sex from male to female, from female to male.
The drinking water standard, secondary is 250. Is there a different number for the ecological?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you are. Certainly over 500 is just completely detrimental. You're seeing that in some places, but
To test the ponds, I mean, would you have to get down into that bottom? Is it one of those kind of two
To do a
things?
profile.
yeah, you would have to do a profile. It's not very difficult to do, but as a water system or as volunteers, there's even something out there they're called salt keepers. They have volunteers all over the country who do chloride testing. They'll send them little kits, and I mean it's literally just it's a little titrator that you put in water, and it'll tell you the parts per million of chlorides in different streams and different.
So I'm just a little English major, but we have, our ponds are filled by groundwater recharge, not runoff, mostly. Like
Yeah.
Eagle Pond would be all groundwater fed, right? So, does that make a difference if it's coming in through the groundwater discharge into the pond as opposed to runoff from roads?
I mean, your ponds are definitely groundwater fed and released, right? The groundwater comes up on the cave, from my understanding, into these kettle ponds, and it comes out. Sometimes it comes out in a stream.
I mean, if you look at Lovell's Pond, it's been dead they've tried all kinds of things to keep things going there.
There's been, a lot of.
They had an aerator in there.
Well, runoff doesn't reach those ponds for sure.
Yeah.
But the state has done
This one does have a little run.
The state did a detailed study on that 2 years ago, and the town is working with the state now to see if they can restore the herring run to it.
Yeah.
And then the town did the alum treatment.
That what it was, Alan? Okay, yeah. I know, I think Falmouth used to use a copper sulfate. And I was told by a former superintendent that sometimes when they used it, it was just a dinghy that they were rowing, and the guy was throwing it off the back of the dinghy as they were going. That's how they treated it. I was like, wow.
No GPS unit on that.
No, there wasn't. And it was a bag.
So we also, here at the Cape, we have a very active bunch of pond volunteers called PALS, Pond and Lake Stewards, I think it's called. And it works regionally throughout the Cape. It's organized by the county and APCC. So they have results.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're testing.
Well, I just wonder if there's a different
I'm gonna find
guideline.
out.
Huh?
I will find out on that.
All right, that's your assignment. Mark,
He's supposed to give me his last assignment. That's a good point.
80% of the way there.
Okay.
can't fire a volunteer.
But the specific conductance, they're testing that pretty much every time they go out to a pond, so it gives you a sense of the salt.
Yeah.
But it's not giving you actual chloride itself.
Right.
And I know Eagle Pond was tested through that program for a while. I don't know if it still is, but
I think so.
it's always been an issue of finding out where the results are. Those somebody must be able to dig it.
Well, IPCC had a database for water quality in ponds. You could GIS, I think.
I would think DPW engineering would have, there's
Amber.
Amber, Unruh, yes. There's special project managers and, you know, they change over the years, but
Yeah.
I would say there would be a good chunk of data there.
I mean,
And if you go via the DPW director, Dan Santos, he'll be able to direct you probably via the town engineer, Griffin Bowden, to the right person or the right treasure trove.
Right. So I'm not sure my question was specifically answered. How often should we test for chlorides? As often as we do it for sodium?
I guess I would start, you know, and then,
Quarterly?
quarterly, it's not very expensive. I guess, I don't know. Some of the research that I read shows that chlorides, well, the Cape water moves pretty quickly, I guess. Again, I'm not a hydrogeologist, but my understanding is that the course stands here and the pressure gradient, you know, basically the water moves pretty quickly in your aquifer. And my understanding is that the chlorides tend to show themselves later in the summer in a lot of studies, more so than right after winter. It takes some time.
Depending on how far away the wells are.
Depending on how far the wells are and where your groundwater is also, or where your surface water is. A lot of people will test for chlorides in their surface water. It just shows that it's in the groundwater, especially when your groundwater is feeding.
Would it make any difference? So we have these happenstance test wells in the little subdivision up gradient of our wells.
Oh, the ones that Tom sampled?
No, wait. I mean, some of them are fairly close to Route 28. Here's Route 28.
Yeah.
And we have leftover test wells that we've been using as.
Yeah. I mean, for a very little amount, you can buy the test strips and test it yourself. It's just a dip in the test, and it's a matter of a few moments.
Yeah, but why would you do that? I mean, I'm saying that, you know, just thinking about it, because we just heard that actually Mass DOT, Route 28,
Does a pretty good job.
does a very good job. So what exactly are you looking for?
I think
And what are you gonna do about it? And
Just like we had these
well,
wells.
that is basically, you know, how do you develop, or we develop a program that makes sense? And then if we do implement whatever in 5 or 10 years, we need to test again to see if whatever that's what I'm getting at, you know?
So with these grants that are available, set up protocols like that.
I don't know, we'd have to talk about it and look into them and get some advice from EPA. But I think testing the wells first is your better testing your drinking water wells makes sense first.
Yeah.
To know how significant it is or not, and then if you're worried about a source, you can focus a little further.
I mean, if you tested those, it's interesting, the more data, right? And that goes for anything. Testing those test wells on one side and your wells on the other, you do get some, and we talked about this with nitrates, is, what is it, 85% of the Cape? A huge section of your town is septic, right?
Yeah.
So sodium and chlorides are in household.
Wastewater, that's right.
Right, and wastewater, and you know, if you use oven cleaner, right, oven cleaner is lye, basically, it's sodium, and so all these things are getting put back into the system, and you probably have, the DPW is an easy target, right, to reduce sodium. You got to choose your battles when it comes to who you're dealing with, septic systems, and what you're asking them not to put in or to put in. But it would be interesting to know what the difference is at upstream of that neighborhood and then downstream. And certainly, if it's an inexpensive test.
Is this, I don't know if you're familiar with D900, tell you residuals, pH, stuff like that. I'll look into it and see if there's a way that it can test chloride levels.
You have a D900.
Yeah, we got a couple of them, yeah.
I think you can use a D900 if you buy what is the ion station.
Yeah.
And I think they're like $1,500, but then you have it forever, right? Or for a long time.
Right.
You can test it just by dipping that in.
Okay.
Is there
I'll look
any
into it a little more.
studies that have estimated the percentage of the population that has sodium problems? Pregnant people? Anybody's particularly sensitive?
Well, Cape Cod is probably higher.
Because we're older?
Population. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, they do say anything above 20 milligrams per liter, which is about where you are, that, sensitive people who have diabetes, elderly people, it certainly can affect them. And chlorides too. Chlorides can cause indigestion, can cause stomach aches, all sorts of issues with the human body. So those studies are out there. I mean, after Flint, chlorides especially are just they are up here with PFAS and lead copper, right? In Michigan, chlorides are above that.
Where did the chlorides come from in Flint again?
In Flint, so they started with they were using a lake water source, and then they switched to the Flint River.
That's right.
And the Flint River had all that runoff from sodium chloride, basically from the roads. So they had a huge amount of chlorides in their water, and they stopped putting the orthophosphate in, and it just shredded the pipes. I mean, within days. It took the pipes and shredded them right down to pipes that were tuberculated, just chunky pieces. It shredded it right off in days, right down to a bare metal pipe. And so anyone who had lead in their house, lead solder, lead pipes, any lead, service lines, unknowns, any service line that was galvanized. I mean, those things were just leaching lead right in their houses. I mean, at huge parts per million, and they, again, they were only testing quarterly or whatever. So they did their first test and were like, whoa, our lead levels are really high. Now we have a year to deal with it. How do we deal with it? And they just took their time. And there were people who said, you need to deal with this immediately. Like, we need to start pounding this with orthophosphates and change our source again. And they just didn't do it.
They were trying to save money.
Yeah, they covered it up. They were trying to save money.
Yeah, they must spend it.
They were, yeah. So I just went out for my second conference in Michigan a couple weeks ago, and it was just everything was chlorides. Every discussion about reducing chlorides, how it's destroying. I mean, they're testing every. They have Michigan, because they test every waterway, and they have like I think it's like 3,000 impaired waterways in Michigan. Fluoride impaired waterways, they're testing it, and it's all.
Is this all a result of Flint that they're doing all this?
Yeah.
They weren't doing it before.
They were. Not as much. And they've taken the lead on water is, I mean, when you drive through Michigan, now, there is a water sign like every couple miles. Michigan water, pure water, drains to, a stream. I mean, everything's marked. It's water, it's everything.
Wow.
Horses left the barn in Michigan, but at least they're doing something.
They are. They're doing.
According to the fee schedule for Barnstable County Water Lab, fluoride testing cost us $32 for that test alone, not as part of secondaries.
And it is part of secondaries, right?
It is part of secondaries, but to test for chloride alone is $32.
Okay.
And how often is it required if you have that? No.
Secondaries, I don't believe are required. It's more volunteer. You're gonna do them every 3 years. I think secondaries, and we do them every year. And we do it annually just because we want to keep track of what's there.
We do it annually.
Yeah, so we're over and above.
Yeah. In Massachusetts, it's a secondary. Other states, it's an
Right.
MCL. I think New Hampshire is a MCL. I think it's 250.
Okay.
I think New York, Michigan, all of those have MCLs. Not sure about Connecticut. Connecticut's doing a really good job with their road salting program, reducing some. And a big part of it is education. All these Snow Pro, Green Pro, or whatever they're calling it, trainings for DPOs and require certifications for private people who do mall parking lots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned Cape Cod Commission. I mean, in the old days, it's something they would have taken on, more regional effort.
Yeah, they've kind of backed off some of the water stuff surprisingly, this is my impression. They don't have to get involved. Director, but, county health maybe, they get the lab.
I'm just wondering if, you could just ask them if they could provide any support, yeah. I don't even know who we would ask at this point.
Probably.
I'm conscious of your time, we had a long way to go, we could probably continue this discussion, but I don't want to be, intrude on your travel.
I'm fine. I'm staying here tonight. So I don't know about John, but
I go all the time, so.
but one thing I did want to bring up, and Mark will know way more about this than me, but one thing that I in doing some research and some work that I did with Scott on your plan was I know a lot of the kind of solutions that the politicians anyway on the Cape are talking about are like, we're going to put in wastewater treatment plants. And one thing I noticed talking about saltwater intrusion, which would certainly increase your chlorides and your salts and your sodium, is that study that just came out with UMass at Plymouth. It showed that one of their kind of main takeaways from it is that they believe a large amount of the pressure gradient, which will keep saltwater intrusion from coming in, is due to the amount of septic systems that are in this area. That water, septic systems tend to put water, first of all, right back into right where it's taken out, right? And secondly, a huge amount of the water, not just, there's very little loss with the septic system. So when you shower, it goes right back in. And those septic systems will keep a pressure gradient on the seawater, pushing it back. And they were saying in Plymouth anyway, the worry was if you were to switch from septic to sewer and move that water away and treat it over here, even if you're injecting it back in a different place, that changes the pressure gradient and allows saltwater intrusion to go further in.
That's a threat across Cape Cod.
Well, one of the things that's being
Makes
discussed
sense.
in Barnstable is the place where our treatment plant is limited by the amount of infiltration. Sure. High groundwater. Sure. So they're challenged by that. And one of the ideas that I'm talking about is treat it, ship it back. Ship it back. I'm not sure we want it back, but that's one thing that's, it's a balance.
You don't want that
Yeah,
response.
it's a balanced budget, and then basically what that
Two
study,
pipes in the ground. Is that what it is?
that study was saying, as the pressure gradient increases,
Yeah.
as you know,
makes sense.
seawater rises, it's going to push that toe or that wedge in further.
Yeah,
And then that pushes your water table up.
yeah.
And so then you're gonna have less, basically those places that right now you're gonna have septic systems are not going to be able to have septic systems. So now you're having less water because you can't have a septic system, which means less pressure and more intrusion.
Yeah, well,
So, you know, in a sense, what you're doing with the IAA systems, I think is almost better than going for a kind of centralized treatment, which.
Yeah.
Do we know how deep the interface is, the salt water and the fresh water versus
30
the,
feet per foot of every foot of fresh water, there's 30 feet of it below there. So if your water table's at 10 feet, there's 300 feet of fresh water, and then you hit the interface.
right, my question was, how far below are
Well,
the screens
Yeah.
of our wells is the salt water? Do we know that?
our wells are what, 50, 60 feet?
We have one that's 160. Yeah, but I don't know where the water levels are in it.
Which one is that?
5.
The new one.
So
Right.
it's way up.
Yeah, so I don't know where the water levels are, how much water there is in there. But yeah, our wells run from, I think we have one that's like station 3 up there's like 32 feet. And there's 42, 52, right around all those areas, 64 on one of them.
True, I'm working with True, you know, and much smaller aquifer there, and so that's floating, it's a floating lens. So as sea level rises, that lens is gonna do this.
Right.
And the wells stay where they were. So,
Yeah. Now, in Western Mass, if you have a problem, you dig deeper.
yeah,
Right? Out here, you
Right.
might have to pull your wells up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's
and not only is it floating up, it's actually getting smaller because some of this way. And Provincetown keeps taking more and more water.
yeah.
Yeah, it goes elsewhere.
So it's a budget problem.
Budget problem on that Hammett lens.
Interest in Cape, it's a fascinating place.
Do you know the names of all the lenses on Cape Cod?
You can't leave without.
You guys named them?
We sent an email to,
I'm not that old.
No, we sent an email to
No credit there.
Give them all these technical names.
No, they've got West Cape and East
Yeah,
Cape.
so we got, it was Tom Camporeri, 3 of us got together, we sent a letter to USGS, and now they're in all the reports.
States. You guys named those?
Did that in like.
That's pretty
10
neat.
minutes.
Yeah, the Robinson lens has been,
I know I came up with one of them, I think it was Sagamore, this was the biggest.
You didn't want to do like the Mark lens, Scott, no.
But we're gonna get a third water tank, and we can name it after Dave.
Yeah, we did.
You got, I mean, no more.
All right, well, it seems to be disintegrated, is there anything?
Yeah. That's kind of, I think I covered your questions. Costs and. Yeah, I think I covered everything that you guys sent to me, I hope.
Just, so I guess my sense is that, my original premise was the water superintendent's been write a letter to the town and say, stop using so much salt, and it's much more complicated.
Yeah, good thing we didn't write the letter.
Yeah,
We have to do a lot more research, and I think maybe our next step would be bringing in Sean from DPW, or.
I think we should look at one of these plans, optimization plans,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Dan and crew over there at DPW have looked at these, they're aware of this stuff probably, and you know, how to optimize. I'm sure they have thought about this. They come, don't look on it. Huh? Don't look on it. Don't look at it.
our DPW director is a very smart guy.
Yeah.
He's an environmental engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
I learned last night, we have 90 professional engineers at DPW. Pretty impressive.
so this would not be, unknown to him. It's just that I don't think anybody's brought it to his attention. It's a problem. I think, I'm sure he has enough problems to deal with, and until somebody brings it up to him as a potential problem. it's not
I really like the 30% thing you mentioned towards the beginning and when we did the little financial thing, to me, that sounds really appealing. Like if we can reduce by 30% and get it paid for through, saving some salt within 3 years, I mean, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, I think pre-wedding is something that you have to do these days. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
Salt works better. First of all, it sticks better when it's wet.
Yeah.
Salt doesn't activate while it's dry. It doesn't do anything. It just sits on the ground while it's dry. But once you wet it starts activating, it starts melting ice. So you pre-wet it, it hits the ground, it starts working. And you save money right there just by doing that. And to retrofit your existing machines, it's not that expensive,
Okay.
especially on a DPW scale with 9.
Well, what are they
9
send us a follow-up?
probably figure out how to do it even cheaper. I think pre-wetting, and then I think the mechanical
Yeah.
plows. I think you'll see that that's what DCR is doing. They're working on, they're also doing kind of these control loop.
And the one thing about the plow monitoring is I think the future of the Cape Cod is some frozen roads, but not a lot of snow. So we haven't seen much snow in the last.
Well, most of our storms, they might start as snow and they turn to drizzle.
Yeah, we get a lot of free
Yeah.
rains. So pretty wet thing.
It's in and out.
Yeah, well, it's still even plowing slush is
Yeah, okay.
100 times cheaper and better for the environment and
Yes.
for your water
Yep.
than treated. It's just you can get your plow right down to the ground, which
that's
these
pretty
new
cool.
plows blades they sell them here on the Cape. I can't remember the name of the place, Gibbies or something, minis. They're
The specialized plows?
yeah.
Yeah.
It sells them right on.
Pictures.
Right here on the Cape, it's like an auto sales place that does plows.
Well, thank you for coming down, both of you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks.
Love it.
Nice. I apologize, everybody, for being late too. We're gonna talk about the review next.
Can I
made it late.
My sanitary survey, listen, my sanitary survey, I had to do my cybersecurity assessment review with DEP and the sanitary survey lady, all getting assessed.